In March 2022, a report from the Competition and Markets Authority concluded that local authorities are forced to pay excessive fees for inadequate, privately run children's homes, while top providers' profit margins sit at a staggering 22.6%. More worryingly, there simply aren't enough places available. Private providers cherry-pick only the most profitable cases. This leaves councils scrambling to find places for the children with the most complex needs, while 40% of children end up being housed miles away from everyone they know, leaving them vulnerable to abuse and to exploitation by criminals. So, why is this happening? Privatization of public services isn't new. Started by Margaret Thatcher's government in the 1980s, successive Labour and Tory governments have continued to sell off or outsource everything from water and energy provision to prison and probation services. For 40 years, the dominant ideology among politicians in the UK has been that privatisation saves money, because the profit motive supposedly makes businesses spend money efficiently, allowing them to charge the government or consumers less. Privatisation of public services in general is a controversial issue, with polling showing that people oppose private companies running essential services, such as rail, healthcare and the postal service. But the privatisation of children's social care was particularly unpopular, with 94% for respondents opposed to it, when the government consulted the public in 2014. Despite both experts and the public being overwhelmingly opposed to it, the government went ahead with the rollout, making the UK the first place in the world to introduce profit-seeking into children's social care. Initially, the government ran a pilot scheme in 5 areas of England. However, the researchers in charge of the study found that contracted-out organisations struggled to provide children in out-of-home care with the consistency and continuity they require, and that while staff in the private sector had lower caseloads, privatisation led to job insecurity. In other words, it was bad for the children, and a mixed result for the staff who had to care for them. In any sensible system, that would have been the end of the matter, but most British politicians are ideologically committed to privatising public services, so, despite the poor results, the government decided to roll out private provision to the whole of the mainland. Today, 75% of children's social care placements are in the private sector, and that's causing problems. For a start, private care providers consistently fail to place an adequate number of care homes in expensive regions such as London, meaning that vulnerable children from these areas are often transported to homes in Wales or northern England, miles away from their social support networks, to where property prices are cheaper. There are valid reasons for moving children out of their local area, such as when they're at risk of exploitation by local criminals, but in practice many are shipped to other parts of the country because there simply aren't enough places for them near where they live. This is the problem with the profit motive. Proponents of privatization say that businesses are efficient at reducing costs, but one way they do that is by cutting corners, providing the worst service they can get away with, which allows them to keep as much of their income as possible in profit. Aside from that, privatized industries tend to offer new employees worse terms and conditions, as demonstrated in the pilot scheme, which saw care workers' jobs become more precarious. But the privatization of children's social care has led to another problem, which you might call a ticking time bomb inside our care system. In their mission to maximize profit, the large, private providers have taken on mountains of debt, so that they can open as many homes as possible. If things continue as they are, the Competition and Markets Authority expects the high level of indebtedness to increase the risk of some providers going bankrupt and abruptly leaving the market. That could mean children in care having their lives uprooted again by being forced to move, and would also leave individual local authorities responsible for finding and funding new homes for all the displaced children. This is because there's no guarantee of finding a buyer who's willing to take over the existing care business when it fails. Despite this, in a recent report commissioned by the government, the Competition and Markets Authority failed to recommend taking provision out of the private sector, which would require a large government investment to buy and set up new homes. This is a false saving, however, because the taxpayer is going to pay the mortgages on the properties anyway, through fees paid to private providers. Instead, the government could use its lower borrowing costs to buy the properties itself and provide them to local authorities at cost. The loans would be repaid by money that we're already allocating to children's social care, and we'd be acquiring hundreds of millions of pounds worth of infrastructure, instead of gifting it to private equity firms. Better yet, if we owned the children's homes, there'd be no possibility of homes having to close because investors went bankrupt or decided to exit the industry suddenly. It would give children the security they need during what is often the most difficult time of their lives. Instead, the Competition and Markets Authority's solution for the problem involves new regulations that force care businesses to keep a larger cash reserve, and to make them produce a contingency plan in case of financial difficulties. To be fair, this will bring down the chance of the children being left suddenly homeless, but why reduce the risk when you can eliminate it? In compiling its recent report, the Competition and Markets Authority found that private providers can only compete on price by providing fewer staff, in addition to cutting the other corners that we've already covered. But is the damage being done to children and staff worth any savings they manage to make? The CMA's proposed solution to solving the lack of available places for children is equally market-based. They propose a system of coordination between local authorities to more effectively let the private sector know what their needs are, because the CMA assumes that the private sector will then step up and provide everything that's needed. Even if this worked, the extra administration it would entail costs money that could be spent on caring for the children, including providing the staff with secure employment, or else we could spend that money on other vital services. And again, why let the market decide whether there are enough places for vulnerable children, when we can guarantee that there are, by making it a government-run service? Capitalist economies are inherently unstable, going through boom and bust cycles that can bankrupt even previously profitable businesses. After the 2008 crash, for instance, banks stopped lending to even healthy businesses until governments stepped in to bail them out, and even then a record number of businesses went bankrupt in the recession that followed. That might have been on the extreme end of financial crises, but when economic crashes happen every few years in capitalist economies, it seems negligent, if not cruel, to leave children's welfare to the whims of the market. Unless you're ideologically committed to the profit motive and privatization, the case seems clear for children's social care to be publicly run. Yet the government doesn't appear to have any intention of bringing it back in-house. We can see that from the fact that they commissioned the Competition and Markets Authority to investigate the failings and possible solutions in the first place. The CMA is an organization designed to regulate markets, and is therefore highly likely to provide a market-based solution. Meanwhile, the Department for Education contract signed by the review's leader explicitly stated that the DFE cannot assume any additional funding from the Exchequer. In effect, they ruled out bringing provision in-house from the start, since that would require an upfront investment. What should we take away from this? The obvious conclusion is that it would be common sense to bring children's care home provision back in-house, as a way to provide the children with the safety and stability they need, to improve workers' job security, and to ensure that public money is spent on helping children, rather than on paying bureaucrats to sit around talking to businesses. But there's a deeper lesson to take away from this as well. From the start, the government's own research showed that privatizing children's care homes was ineffective, and that both 94% of the public and experts were opposed to it. And yet the government went ahead with it anyway. This strongly hints that our democracy is broken, or rather, that it doesn't function as we're always told that it does. Far from representing us and our interests, politicians all too frequently represent the interests of money and business, and there's no reason to believe that's going to change unless something in the system changes. The Electoral Reform Society and its supporters are pushing for a form of proportional representation, alongside other changes to the electoral system, to make our MPs more accountable. While that's certainly a step in the right direction, the corruption will never actually end until private fortunes are no longer able to subvert the economy for their own benefit. That can only happen when we take the profit motive out of our economy, by organizing manufacturing and services based on human need, rather than on what's most profitable to those who have spare money to invest. As long as our economy operates based on the principle of private profit, the wealthy will use their wealth to corrupt the political system, because doing so increases their profits. If you've enjoyed this video, then remember to like, subscribe, and share. And let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time.